Okie dokie. Meredith Collins. We've only known each other for a hot minute. Meeting in April, I believe, of last year at a retreat. And even though it was quite a brief encounter, I feel like we went so deep, so deep, so quickly. And I think what really stood out to me was just, yeah, the level of raw vulnerability and presence and care that, you showed me and everyone else there at the retreat. I don't take that lightly, and that really means a lot to me. And I think that really speaks to who you are as a leader and as a beautiful soul and human being. And I know that trait of courage, and sharing all the beautiful things that you did with me around your family and your work challenges has ultimately shaped you into such a powerhouse in people and culture over 3 decades, and a storyteller and a keynote speaker, and someone who I see is really devoted to fighting the good fight and helping people tap into the power and the strength that's within them and overcome a lot of their own self-imposed constraints. So yeah, really blessed to have you here, and I really appreciate you sharing your time with us today, Meredith.
That is all incredibly generous, and I'd love to say to you to stop, but I'd like you to go on. But with that said, I think when we met, it was we're both seekers and lifelong learners, and that's what we're in a collective that has that same attitude. And you're not a dissimilar age to my sons. I have 3 sons, and so I see you.
Yeah, thank you, Meredith. And that's actually the whole podcast. It's just going to be pumping up your tires for about an hour. Strap in, whoever's listening.
Yay! Right.
But yeah, I mean, I think something that we touched on at the retreat and came back to time and time again, and spoke even off the podcast as well, is around this notion of not good enoughness or unworthiness, which really has been the the inspiration and the concept behind why this Liberated podcast was started in the first place. So yeah, perhaps let's use that as a jumping off point. Like how have you seen that unfold, in your sphere, in your world, in the workplace, and perhaps speak to some of the challenges that so many people, including yourself, have faced, driven by this crippling fear of not being good enough.
I think not being good enough for me has manifested in grinding and just constant striving. And I think when we're not good enough or not worthy enough or unlovable or feel disconnected, and I had always through my life disconnected, maybe with moments of being connected or belonging, but mostly not belonging. There's no standard. So there's nowhere that I would say, oh, that's enough or that's good enough. And I often find that I'd be absolutely striving and going above and beyond and looking to prove my worth and do the very best I could, or nothing. Like I'd quit, I'd run. If I had a history of I was really comfortable working in project roles because they came to an end, and it was almost like it was a reasonable reason to leave. But often around that year mark, I'd get really itchy feet and think, and I think the thinking was, although I didn't clock it at the time, was it's time to move on. I've given them my best work. What if they find out I'm not good enough? What if they find out don't know what I'm doing? What if they realize I don't have an undergraduate degree? Whatever the story was, I'd run. So it would be very reasonable. It would be like, oh, no, I've had another opportunity present, or, oh no, it's the contract's ending. But I manufactured that. I orchestrated all of that so that I could leave with a reasonable reason. And it wasn't until, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago that I stayed in a job for longer than 12 months. So that's, at 47 or something, never been in a role longer than 12 months. And it struck me that I was always on the run, and what was I doing? But I was tired as well. I was tired, and that grind takes its toll.
Yeah, I think the fatigue and the exhaustion is something that's so universal when we're talking about unworthiness. And I think what I found in my own journey as well, not and with people I've worked with, is it's not tiredness from the work necessarily. It's like a tiredness from pretending, like pretending to be okay and pretending to have it all together, and masking, like you were saying, and putting on a brave face, like that is exhausting. It's exhausting to constantly be wearing that mask.
I concur, and I grew up in a family that my parents were quite high achievers, and for the most part, my immediate family was pretty functional. My dad was a bit of a rogue unit, but my mum was very functional and very grounded in reality, and she was deeply empathetic. She was incredibly smart. I always thought my dad was the entrepreneur and the driver, but kind of in later years, I realised it was really my mum that held it together and had the vision and the plan, and she drove all of that. But my extended family, there's a lot of crazy in there. There is a lot. And I mean, obviously, we're all part of that system. So I also had very mixed messages coming in about, my mum had given me one message, then I'd have a couple of aunts that were undermining what my mum would say. And I adored those two women particularly. And so I had a lot of conflict and incongruence that I needed to manage and work with. And I've often talked to people about, we've got this bucket that sort of sits metaphorically in our gut, and that everything we don't deal with, everything we don't understand, it all gets stuffed into this bucket, and the lid's there, and different points, the lid on the bucket starts to rock. And once that lid blows, it is very hard to get it back on. And I think that we vent, that we have sort of like a volcano, it vents and it lets the pressure off a little bit, and maybe we swear or we have a bit of a meltdown or we cry or whatever, and that bucket settles a little bit. But when that bucket for me finally blew, and I just couldn't keep the lid on anymore, it was certainly a bit of a midlife reckoning. And I won't say that that was an easy time at all.
So what did that look like with the lid being blown off, like in practice, and what you were doing, or how you were coping, and what that was like for you in that point in time?
It it blew not long after my mum passed away, and she died. She had 12 months where she was quite sick, and as much as I was not the nicest person to her, but she was a consistent rock in my life. Once she died and I was not managing dad, that's not fair, but that she wasn't buffering me from his shenanigans. I was very resentful. I was very resentful that she died and left me with him. I had to come to realize pretty quickly that I had a problem with alcohol. I'd had disordered eating all my life, or eating disorders. In the later part of my life, it was when all of this was happening, it was more disordered eating rather than an eating disorder. And there is sort of a difference where I was actively in, bulimic and binging and purging when I was younger. And that was all just numbing techniques. And I think we all have our numbing techniques. It's just how much they interfere in our lives. So my eating was disordered. I had a broken marriage behind me. I'd got married because I was frightened of being left on the shelf, which is just, that was at 26, and I had 3 children. So if I was going to leave that marriage, then I was going to be a single parent. So it was just this serious unraveling that was happening faster than I could keep up. And as Anne Lamott says, my standards were dropping faster than I could manage. Drinking more than ideal, and I didn't drink a lot. So people would say to me, "No, you don't have a problem with alcohol." But I would drive, sorry, when I knew that I was not capable, that I really shouldn't be on the road. And thank God I never hurt anyone else or myself. I had these 3 boys that I just constantly was driving and grinding, and all the promises that I'd made to myself as a parent, that I'm not going to push them and I'm going to be available and I'm going to make sure they have the opportunity to flourish. Well, that wasn't happening. I mean, everyone's okay now. We're all out the other side. And in fact, today's my 13th sobriety birthday. So it's an auspicious occasion. So it was just, there was a lot going on. I had my second marriage, which I was in, and he absolutely was a rescuer and a savior. I chose him very well. That was all on the brink of unraveling as well, because he brought his own stuff to the mix. But this was all symptomatic of just that not being good enough, being unlovable, sort of having sabotage patterns on board that just when things got good, I would, just knew how to unravel it, either wishingly or unwittingly. So that all happened around in my early 40s when we're often carrying the most pressure, a lot of financial pressure, familial pressure, career, mid-career, climbing the ladder, wanting to be the best, and I wanted to be the best I can to prove to myself that I was worthy, and none of it mattered. None achieving and attaining all of the things that I thought would do it did not fill that hole in my soul.
Firstly, congratulations, Meredith, on your sobriety anniversary. That's
Thank you.
such a beautiful milestone. I'm really glad that we're recording this today, um, to really honor you in that way.
Thank you.
I'm curious though, because I've experienced the great unraveling as well, where you have those like seemingly stable structures in your life, family and work, and holding it together until you're not. So when you realize that your marriage is breaking down and the lid was blown off and using alcohol and food to cope, and you're in this crisis of sorts, what was going through your head at the time?
I wanted to be dead. And in fact, it wasn't that I wanted to die, I just didn't want to live. It was just, is this all it is? This can't be. I just wanted the pain to stop. And I can't even really describe the pain. It's just this unfulfilled, broken. I felt so broken. I felt so broken. I'd run a business that was probably ahead of its time at the time. It was a social media agency, and started that in 2007, before social media was even a thing, and people couldn't get streaming videos, and Twitter only had 30 or 40,000 users, and it was just like, and I thought, if I start a business, that'll be it. I'll have more time, more money, more energy. I'll be able to, and exactly the opposite was true. It was like adding another child to the mix, running a business, and I was just empty and exhausted. And every time I turned around, somebody wanted something from me, like a child who needed, Mum, can I have my hair cut? And it's like, I can't cope with a haircut. I could just, much less a client calling. I didn't even answer the phone to clients in the end. It's like, I don't want to talk to anyone. So, and I think that that's where I would find solace in having a little glass of wine at 5 o'clock, sitting at the computer with wine rings on quotes and things. And I didn't drink a lot. But it was just like this little chemical release that just took the edge off everything. So it was a hard time, but I have learned that we don't shift until we hit a bottom, and the bottom is up to me, how far down I need to go. Some people go right down so far it's outrageous. Some people's bottom is death, and other people's bottoms is just probably like mine were, where it still looked all functional and white picket fence on the surface, but inside it was just like Dante's Inferno. Is that a mixed metaphor? Maybe it is. But it was hot and it was bad.
Yeah. Yeah, fiery pits of hell, definitely
Yeah.
sounds like it. What was the actual tipping point when you were like, "Okay, I can't continue on like this. I can't continue numbing out. Something has to change."
I was pretty desperate, and I didn't know what change was going to look like. I think counsellors and therapists absolutely have a very important place in recovery and therapeutic practice, and it was interesting because any doctors that and I didn't really see a lot, let's be honest, but having a conversation with a GP, or when I was seeing a counsellor, nobody ever said to me, do you think you have a problem with alcohol? Because if they said, how much do you drink? I'd say, oh, a couple of glasses a day, which was all it was. It wasn't even a bottle every 2 days. And so nobody picked up that it had little to do with the alcohol, but everything to do with my thinking. And then I met a woman at a networking event, a women's networking group. And she was, I don't know, she became a client. She was a psychotherapist. Not that I really knew anything about this, but I knew she ran 12-day programs. And she'd started saying to me, you really need to do a 12-day program. And she gave me her book, which was called Behind Closed Doors. There was another one that she'd written. And I just kept saying, who can find 12 days? I've got a family, because I'm so super important that the world will stop turning if I'm not there to cook every meal, and they're probably all better off without me, David, let's be honest. She said to me, you really need to come, and there's one starting on the I don't know, it was the 16th of January because that was the day I stopped drinking. And she said, "This is the best time to do it. People are on holidays. There aren't a lot of there's not a lot of client activity. There's a long weekend thrown in there. So it's only actually about 7 days out of work."
Mm.
And I said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm going on holidays." And she said, "See if you can change it." So I was about to sign up for something I didn't even know what I was signing up for. And as you'd be aware, every caravan park and camping site in Australia is full in January and December, and there is nowhere to go. And I rang the camping area and I said, "Oh, hey, we've got a holiday booked for 2 weeks in January. I'm just wondering if there's any chance of changing that to Boxing Day." And she said, "Yeah, we've just had a cancellation." It was like, okay, all right, well, maybe I'm meant to do it. Now I would refer to that as a God job, that there was divine intervention, something stepped in. And when I said to my husband, who is still my husband, but my second husband, "I'm going to do this," he just rolled his eyes like, "Oh my God, another personal development course. Here we go. Don't expect
Mm.
me to support you." Because I was always looking, I was always signing up for the thing that was going to be, maybe this will be the answer. Maybe this will help me fill up this hole in my soul that I would never have referred to it as a hole in my soul, but that's what I know it was. It was a spiritual deficit.
What was actually driving that seeking, do you think? Because in my journey as well, I guess exploring just a bunch of different modalities and therapies and constantly wondering maybe one day I'll get to a place where I feel safe in my skin and in my body because I don't right now. And I think, yeah, for me, that was like a lack of safety or feeling like something is broken in me. And I know a lot of people on this path may be able to relate. Yeah, what was the narrative in your mind that sort of perpetuated this endless seeking and chasing and looking for answers?
I never felt, and I know never is an absolute, so I do try to avoid using the words never or always, but I can hand on heart say that, let's go 95% of the time, I didn't feel like I belonged. I didn't feel like anyone loved me. Yet I came from this very tight, certainly immediate family, and even my extended family. I can look back now and maybe their love was not particularly functional, but I was loved. I absolutely was loved, particularly by my parents. But I didn't feel that. I felt that there was something really wrong with me. There was a lot of incongruence. So my mum, for instance, would say to me, and remember she's a baby boomer, so and she would say, but not a freewheeling free love of the 60s necessarily. So the message would be, sex is a lot of fun and sex is great and you do that with somebody that you love. And she wasn't a prude with that. I think she was just sort of trying to teach me good relationship hygiene, and you do this with somebody who loves you and respects you. And that never sat with me. It was always like that. I don't feel like that's true. So there was I had a lot of incongruent messaging coming to me, which kind of in my is revealed itself as to why that I had all this incongruence. But that was very weighty for a young person to be having to navigate. I was told that I was smart and that I went to a selective girls' high school, and yet I was imploding spectacularly out of school. And when I went to the principal and said I was leaving in year 10, she said to me that, you are the creme de la creme. You should be going to university. And so this is in the late 80s where it wasn't necessarily so accessible. But it was, so here's another, like a message of incongruence, that I'm wasting my life. And yet got this massive hole thinking, I don't know what's wrong with me, but this is not right. I found it really hard to maintain relationships, as in friendships. That played out in, I was probably overshared information, which would frighten people off. And so suddenly I'd share something deep and meaningful with a friend, and I'd never hear from. They'd ghost me in today's terms. So I went through the world quite discombobulated, just like I don't really know what's going. I'm in the world, but I'm not. I don't feel like I'm really of it. So I didn't belong. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. And even in my own family, I just used to sort of think, my God, these children would be so much better off without me. They probably wouldn't be better off with their dad, but I feel like they'd be better off without me, because I'm not doing a very good job.
Wow. And I guess how did that 12-day event go then when you signed up and you were going through this seeking? And how long were you seeking before actually you signed up for the 12-day?
I would have been seeking for 20 years. Probably I did my first personal development course with a guy by the name of Paul Blackburn down in Canberra when I was sort of 22 or 23 maybe. So it was sort of 20 years before. In my 30s, I was doing Brandon Bay's work and the journey work. And I'd uncovered there that there was a significant event when I was 3 years old, and that is that I had been molested, that I had no memory of, but I had been molested by a next door neighbour. And when I rang my mum and described this situation and described the person and described the area, she was like, "Oh, that's our next door neighbour. That was the couch downstairs in the rumpus room. You were no more than 3.5 years old then." I was able to describe to her what I was wearing. She said, "Yes, that was like a little brown pinafore that you had." I was upstairs packing with the new baby because we were moving interstate with Dad's work. And she said to me, "Why are you asking me? Like, where has all this come from?" Because I was describing it with such clarity. And I said, "I think this man molested me." And the words out of her mouth were, "That explains everything." So I think for her, she'd watched helplessly these sabotage patterns, hypersexualization. There'd certainly been other events when I was I was 9 and then 11 and then 15 where I had been sexually assaulted or sexually abused. And there's very clear data to support that young people who are molested, they tend to become victims throughout their life unless that is broken or fixed or, let's not call it fixed, that's a terrible word, but unless that's managed and unraveled. So I think for her, she was a smart woman and very intuitive. And when I said that to her, she was like, "Oh, yeah, that all the pieces have fallen into place," or the running, what they call in a 12-step program, geographicals. That is always on the run, always looking for the next thing, always looking for the next fix, always, or in Buddhism, that hungry ghost where you've got the long gullet and the big belly and you're just trying to swallow whatever you can and nothing fills you up. That was me. That was me to a T. So by the time I got to the 12-step program, Mum had died. So I think that the news that I shared with her was it didn't kill her on its own, but I certainly think it had a hand in
Mm.
her demise. That and Dad's shenanigans.
What do you mean by Dad's shenanigans? Because you mentioned that a couple times.
Yeah, he was hugely social, the life of the party, the good time guy, and not in a way that he's off having affairs or nefarious or doing deals or anything, but I think he probably would have true ADHD, clinical ADHD. He was a chiropractor when if he was focused on something, he was hugely focused and you couldn't pull him out. But if it was anything else, he was all over the place, like a mad woman's breakfast. Like he was everywhere. And as I found out when I took him on after Mum's death, he is great fun and everybody loves to be part of Lindsay's life. He's now passed away also. But to have to be in the firing line and picking up the pieces and finding the lost phone and finding the lost wallet and finding the lost Opal card or whatever it happens to be, constantly in his wake trying to clean stuff up. And he would always be very good humoured and he took that to his death. But it was very difficult to be the one that was in the background fixing stuff or when he said something ridiculous, asked somebody for the umpteenth time if they're pregnant and no, they're just fat. There was always that kind of stuff that Mum managed, and she managed it for a really long time until I think she was tired and didn't want to manage it anymore and then passed the baton to me. So, and there's definitely alcoholism on his side of the family. He was not an alcoholic. He was not a practicing alcoholic, but it was definitely on his side of the family and a lot of genetic trauma in the lineage. So I think when I went into the 12-day program, it was the first time I'd heard about family of origin, how people come together, that you can come together and be two individuals that form a relationship and the relationship is its own entity, or we can come together as two individuals and we become enmeshed and entwined and it's very dysfunctional and No one's getting their needs. Didn't even know what I didn't know what adult needs were. I had no idea. So we bring our unmet childhood needs into our adult relationships, and then we wonder why our adult relationships aren't working. And I think one of the biggest things that I learned in that 12-day is that it may not be my fault, but it is my responsibility.
Mm,
So understanding about being molested and stuff, and that meant I could see a lot of my behaviours and why I acted out and why I felt like I didn't belong because this man had created a barrier. Uh, and also, I think a 3-year-old brain, no wonder I've gone through life kind of discombobulated because I just couldn't reconcile at 3 what had happened. If anyone's done any pop psychology, children have felt thought and they suck up feelings and they suck up the feelings of the adults around them. So even their frontal lobe can't process it. So it's all kind of in that old brain and it's felt thought and felt feeling. So the education in that program was incredible, and it was an outpatients program. I was a little shocked at that when I found out I was in an outpatients program because I thought I was just doing a personal development course.
mm,
But I went on to do another 12-day, and I had some more group work where I'd always resisted group work because it's like, oh, no, my problems are way too intense and special to be sharing in a group. But in fact, it's in a group that a lot of the shame dissolves.
mm,
So that was great. But after about 6 or 8 months of this very intense ongoing therapy, I needed to stop crying and I needed to integrate and I needed to practice doing life as a sober person without always being in therapy, without crying. And I was crying. It's a dysregulated nervous system trying to regulate, right? So it's good. It's good news. It's good news that there was all that crying and all this stuff coming up from it. But we also have to get on with life. I also had to live, and I still had 3 children to try and parent in a different way, in a relationship that I was trying to navigate in sobriety. So
mm.
the sobriety was never difficult. I've never had the need to drink was removed miraculously from me. So that has never been an issue. But we still have to start doing life on life's terms and learn how to apply a 12-step program, which has been amazing. And the knowledge of what had occurred, the event that occurred, that did not liberate me. That was just cognitively, I knew what had happened. I could see why it had happened. It did not liberate the shackles.
So just on that, Meredith, because what I hear, when you share that with your mum, is that her response, "Oh, that makes so much sense." It's like like a bit of closure, like clarity, understanding that, this is the reason that informs a lot of why, you showed up the way you did and in those self-sabotaging patterns. What was your initial response though when that came up in the Brandon Bayes journey?
Again, I went straight into that discombobulation, like this can't be real. I'm making this up. But as I sat with it, I realized that yes, this is probably ground zero. This is the event that has created all these other feelings and all these other stories. So it was definitely, and I was like, oh, this is what's wrong with me. So that was liberating. Like I hadn't been making this up. There was this deep pathology behind the feelings, and it definitely helped me come to terms with a lot of what I'd done and how I'd done it and why I'd ended up where I did. It wasn't enough. It didn't allow me to just sort of step out of that story and go, that's not true anymore. That happened, but none of that's true. So I think the decisions and the stories that 3-year-old mind made up continued to drive the bus for many, many years, even with cognition on board.
Yeah, I feel that, and that's definitely been, I think, one of the biggest insights or breakthroughs that I've had is there's such a subtle yet very big distinction between understanding something intellectually and having an awareness of, where this pattern started, what was the significant traumatic event or memory that perpetuated it, and actually being able to not feel bound by it anymore and to end the patterns, right? And I definitely felt that as well, going through psychotherapy for 8 years and becoming very aware of the fact that I was numbing out with drugs and alcohol as well to escape my own deep-seated fear of not being good enough and continuously chasing superficial trappings of success or what I see other people doing to hopefully, fabricate that feeling of enoughness. And I understood why, and I understood how my parents raised me, and I could have compassion for them and for me. But I continued to numb out, and I continued to feel in my body, like you pointed out before, like dysregulated, as in, for those who might not know, it's like constantly being in fight or flight, constantly
Yep.
being on edge, constantly, like the hungry ghost chasing validation and attention to hopefully feel safe or seen or approved.
And I
So
think so. With your dysregulated nervous system, how did it impact you? Did you not sleep well? What happened for you?
yeah, sleep was a really big issue, definitely. I'd struggled with insomnia for so many years. And even like seemingly being in bed and being asleep for 8 hours, but waking up in the morning feeling fucking knackered. I'm like,
Yep.
I don't understand
Yep.
why. I'm
Yep.
doing everything that I'm seeing online. I've got good sleep hygiene. I'm screens away an hour before bedtime. I'm reading my book, winding down. But, I wake up and I feel like I need to go back to bed. So that was definitely a big issue, the numbing out, as we've spoken about. Yeah, also, I guess, what really manifested for me, and it was a real hairy, armpitted beast, as you would say, is social anxiety. Whether I would be at an event or a party or a networking event or speaking in front of a large group of people and just constantly being afraid of what other people are thinking of me and getting so caught up in my head, like a racing mind, worrying about saying the wrong thing and trying so desperately hard to say the right thing, whatever that is, as opposed to just feeling safe and present and being able to be in my body. So that's how it manifested for me. It's very unpleasant.
Yeah, no, and I resonate with all that you've just said. And I remember there was one psychotherapist that I, paid $3,500 for not that long ago to do 10 sessions, and I reckon I could have got the little gems in 2 sessions if we compressed it all. But one of them was around that in trauma, in brains that have been traumatized, particularly at a young age, and I guess this stands, as I'm saying out loud, this stands for anyone who's experienced some kind of trauma with a capital T, a big event, that the the war's over, but they forgot to tell my body. And that said that, that being hypervigilant and not sleeping well. And I too have had that. And it's like, oh, it's just, perimenopause. And it's like, no, I don't think so. I don't think so. And the social anxiety, booze was just a beautiful social lubricant. I always considered that I was quite extroverted, but actually I'm not. I'm quite happy with my own company now. That could be age, but a lot of that was about not drinking. That actually I'm okay just being quiet, and I'd prefer to be in a small group than lost in a big group. So there's a whole lot of realizations that have come with age and maturity.
And then, you mentioned even with the understanding of that significant event at age 3 and being molested, you cognitively were aware of it, but still didn't feel liberated from the shackles of that story. So what helped you liberate yourself from the shackles of that story?
Look, the long and the short of it is plant medicine. Because by this time I've been doing the work for 30 odd years, and I guess that there's a bit of a dopamine hit that comes with doing the work, in that, we have a realization and the light bulb goes on. It's like, oh, that's a really interesting. There's definitely an addictive component to doing deep work, but also from just a material point of view, like good things used to happen kind of when I cleared blocks, anything from building a new house. We often call this the house that Shirley built. This was the first thing that happened in sobriety, that, I don't know, the waters just passed open, right through to just landing a great contract. So good things really happen when you kind of energetically shift some of these blocks. But I knew I was still. My dad had passed away. He passed away 3 years ago in June, this coming June, and I knew that there was a lot of remorse, regret with him, that I didn't feel like I'd been my best self. In many ways, I was quite resentful, and I'd been wanting to try plant medicine, and it's quite an underground movement. I know that a lot of people are a lot more aware of it, and there's Netflix specials, and In Wars and Waves, and which is a Netflix special, and other sports stars that have participated in plant medicine ceremonies. But I was talking to my niece about it, and she said, "Oh, there's a really good book called Listening to Ayahuasca. If you're going to do a ceremony, you might want to read that book." And I listened to the book twice, and I thought, right, I think this is something I need to explore. It feels like it's time. And I was told 10 years ago when I first started looking to do plant medicine, when you're ready, she'll call you. And I looked for 10 years, or not 10 years, but I certainly looked hard for a couple of years and nothing happened. So I just sort of went, oh, well, it's all too hard. And then when I made inquiries November 2024, uh, within 2 weeks, I was at a plant medicine ceremony. So it kind of goes back to that, what I said earlier about the recovery, the 12-day program. Like, it was a bit of a God job. It was like, okay, you're ready.
Just on that though, Meredith, because I know a lot of people, and certainly I have felt a lot of apprehension and even fear about doing deeper inner work. What was it particularly, whether it was about the book or an insight or a hunch, or like what gave you permission or safety or confidence to be like, you know what, I'm going to sit with ayahuasca?
I think I've done so much stuff. There's not that much left to do on the laundry list. I was running out of things on the bucket list. I cannot. Yes, I do. I was at university because I've been doing a master's degree in health and social well-being, and I was doing a final assessment task on, and I was doing it on leadership and compassion in leadership, and how all the stuff that leaders do and don't do well. And it came up in research, and I went, oh, ayahuasca, I haven't clocked that for a while. So it just felt right. And I'm also quite risk prone. That's settled down a bit in my old age, but I'm more than happy to go on a bit of an adventure. And always there's that absolute, I often have leaned into being on the edge of stuff. So it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, but it's still pretty edgy. So it attracted me, and I went for it.
Right. Okay. And so then why was ayahuasca so particularly powerful or effective for you to liberate yourself and stop being driven by that story from age 3?
I think if I take a step back from that, there's a fantastic documentary that was out just before Christmas, and it's fringy, and it's called On the Edge of Life. And I won't say I'm completely anti-pharmaceuticals. I absolutely think they've got their place. But the interesting thing in this documentary, which was investigating, it's a psychiatrist and a clinical psychologist who were running a clinical trial on people that are in palliative care and were terrified of dying. And the couple of patients that they were interviewing and talking to were a young woman who was 35 and had terminal cancer, and she was not far off death, and then an older woman. And one of the statements that the psychiatrist, who was a very balanced man and very pragmatic, and then he went and did some plant medicine, and it changed his view. It shifted his gears a lot. But one of the things that he said to both of these patients was, the thing about plant medicine is that everything you see is in your mind. It is of your mind. It is for you to address, to lean into, to learn from. There is nothing that will be fabricated. So even the darkness, there is a lot to be learned from that, because it is all coming from you, as opposed to pharmaceuticals, which suppress, which create stories and issues, and we don't know what's real and what's not. So I think for me, the liberation that when I went into the ayahuasca ceremony, I committed to 2 nights, so 2 ceremonies. And the first one, I was definitely nervous and reticent about going in, and the facilitator is incredibly well versed and he's very experienced, and so he explained a lot of what would be going on. And I was very scared about purging, very scared. And I've done probably 12 ceremonies now. I have never purged either vomiting or diarrhea ever. But I did the first night, I kind of had a lot of twitching and a lot of movement and heat coming from my pelvis, which I make up was a lot of that energy from that abuse stuff that was coming out. And I came out sort of discombobulated in my usual state. Like, that was kind of interesting, and, oh, this happened and that happened, and, oh, I can, but it wasn't this sort of earth-shattering, but I felt that I was had a lot of water coming out of my eyes, which again is just cleansing. So the second night when I went in, I said I was very clear, and my intent was, "Give it to me. Show me what I need to see." I wanted to go in full on. I do not want to leave here with whatever it is that is holding me back. And my dad came into the circle in spirit into my mind, and I felt this huge compassion. The one thing that plant medicine does is absolutely open up our hearts, or in my experience, it opens my heart, and I just feel all this love and for humanity. And it's a very ayahuasca particularly is a very feminine, it's firm, but very feminine, and it's caring and it's compassionate. And my dad came in, and I said to her, and I'd done compassionate work at university, and it was, if you're feeling like you need to love and be compassionate for yourself, put your hand on your heart. So I hand on my heart, and I just said to my dad in my mind, "I am so sorry for the way I behaved. Will you forgive me?" And his words, clear as day, were, "There's only one person that needs to forgive you, and it's you." And I just cried and cried. I cried for humanity. I don't know how long I cried, but it felt like a very, very, very long time. And that was what needed to happen. That this 3-year-old made a whole lot of decisions about her dad not loving her, about her mum caring more about her brother, because that they'd both let this heinous event occur with their pure, innocent 3-year-old with a man that was supposed to be looking after me, and they'd fed me like a, Christian to the lions. And I'd made up all these stories about that, and that 3-year-old has been driving the bus for 50 odd years. And David, it wasn't true. It was not true. None of it was true. The event was true. The event happened. I have no doubt about that. But the
Mm.
stories that I made up and applied to the rest of my life, which sabotaged so many opportunities, so many, uh, that, yeah, it just, it's been a very hard, it was a hard way to live based on a 3-year-old driving the bus. So she's just firmly in my heart now. She just gets told that I've got it handled now. I'm a sweet FA, a functional adult, and it's okay. I've got it. Leave it with me. I'll handle it. And that was the game changer.
That's so beautiful, Meredith. Thank you. Thank you. It's so deeply revelatory to realize that, your feelings were real, but, the story and or the stories and the beliefs that were created as a result of that weren't a fact. And to be able to, hold, that 3-year-old close to your heart and give it, the love and compassion and reassurance that it perhaps didn't see or didn't receive is so heartwarming. If you could say something to that 3-year-old now as the present day version of you, what would you say to her?
That is a good, I wish I had something really profound to say. I think, it'll be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, it's not the end. I've got it. I've got it handled. So I'm sure that there's something, other people would come up with something way more profound. But I think that's probably what I've learned, that it all unfolds. And I guess my message to anyone else's 3-year-old or 10-year-old, whoever's driving the bus, is that you can't believe everything you think.
Yeah, spot on. All it takes is one story to create weeks, months, years, decades, lifetimes of pain and unnecessary suffering, which boggles my mind still to this day. Even though we're both in this work, it's wild. So to hear you talk about this self-forgiveness and letting go of self-blame and shame is I think it's really inspiring. Whoever's listening, maybe you can relate to Meredith's story. It's really hard, I find, to forgive myself when it comes to forgiveness. I'll happily forgive others as opposed to forgiving myself. So that's such a breakthrough moment, and I'm curious to hear how that act alone, not just cognitively but somatically, as you mentioned, letting go of this energy in your pelvis and being able to liberate yourself from these shackles. How has that now shifted your relationship with yourself or parents or work or kids? Like, how has that actually changed who you are? since that experience?
I think I'm definitely much softer with myself and that grind. Like I haven't been particularly well this week, and just as an example, yesterday morning my alarm went off at 5. I was going to walk the dogs. I was going to go to Pilates. I was going to, do a swim. There was all this stuff I was going to do, and it was just like, I actually think I need to stay in bed. And I stayed in bed till 10, which is unheard of, unheard of. And I think even my husband was like, God, she's not kidding. She's like, this isn't a story. I think over the Christmas break, some people may judge me to be wasting my life, but I binge watched some shows. Like in the middle of the day, we sat down and it was just like, well, we're not going on holidays, but this is a time to restore. And I didn't have a plan every day. My whole life, generally, there is a plan for the day of what I'll do, when I'll do it. Like, oh my God, I can't get through the day without knowing what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. And so it's kind of subtle, but it's profound for me. And anyone else looking in might go, yeah, no, what's the problem with binge watching or watching the cricket or whatever? But that punishing, that keep going at all costs, like it'll get done. And if it needs to get done, I'm disciplined enough that it will get done. And if it doesn't need to get done, we'll do it when it needs to be done. Or I'll do it tomorrow or I'll do it later. Or so it maybe doesn't sound particularly profound, but I know that that is a really different way of showing up.
Yeah, even hearing you say that, it's so relieving being able to just rest in that
Yeah,
awareness and belief that, yeah, it's like the world isn't going to come to a grinding halt if I don't send this email out today or finish this report. And
exactly.
I'm allowed to listen to my body and
Yeah.
give myself what I need. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know how I've raised 3 children that lie and watch television, but I have, and I've got a husband who will. And up until recent times, I would be judging him like, "You've got a lawn to mow, and you've got this to do," and he does jobs all the time. Like he loves a job, but he also takes time out, and he also does what he calls play therapy. Like he'll say, "No, no, I'm just going to do some programming on my train." He's got a train set. Let's not go there. But it's that goes backwards and forwards in the garage at set times. And he is a great believer in play therapy. And I have always dismissed that as that is bullshit and there is proper work to do. And now it's like, oh, you do you. That is plant medicine. That is plant medicine that has given me that compassion and space. Nothing else. Even the best of recovery did not give me that. Meditate for 12 minutes in the morning, say a prayer, off we go.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And the laundry list is complete.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, since you do work in leadership development and in people and culture as well, like reflecting on this experience, right, and how not good enoughness showed up for you in your career and led to this grinding and hustling and pushing and chasing at the expense of your own well-being and sacrificing time and energy and using substances to try and cope with the pressure and kind of going through the seeking journey and being able to identify the core wound and to actually feel it fully and heal it. What do you think, based upon your own experience, leaders would benefit more from, in the modern world and in today's day and age?
That is an enormous question. And I firmly believe that leadership starts with self and that we need to do the work on ourselves to be able to lead others congruently, consistently, and with care. And I think people's needs are simple. They need clarity, they need accountability, and they need to understand, and they need to feel that their leaders got their back. I think we're as complex as we are, we're pretty simple. We want to belong. We want to feel like we're making a difference. We want to feel like we're important. And I think that that can be as easy as quality performance check-ins from our leaders to their people on a reasonably regular basis. I don't think it's difficult, but we haven't got the basics right. And I sit in with an executive leadership team now, and there's a lot of talk about commercials, and there's a lot of talk about scope creep, and there's a lot of talk about, the numbers. And my consistent message is, yeah, and what about the people? And what about our engagement score? And And not that I think an engagement score is the be all and end all, but that is an outcome of engagement, of looking after our people. And I don't mean looking after our people like, sure, you want a day off? Go on, have it. Sure, you want to work at home when the policy is 4 days a week or 3 days a week in the office. It's not that. People need consistency, they need clarity, and we all perform better when we've got that. And we all perform better when we know what the reasons are and what the consequences are.
Mm,
And leaders just don't do that. They're hard on themselves, they're resentful about a lot of their people, and it's hard work. Leadership is not for the faint of heart.
mm. Agreed. I think, yeah, what really stood out is definitely that piece about self, right? And maybe it sounds airy fairy and probably sound really good on a bumper sticker, but yeah, I do believe you can't lead others until you've learned how to lead yourself, which
Correct.
means being able to, like you pointed out so beautifully before, it's like, yeah, realizing that my wounds or whatever, or my unconscious reactive patterns, it's not my fault, but it is my accountability and it is my opportunity and invitation to take radical responsibility for that and choose to show up differently, because people don't necessarily respond to what you say, they respond to how you act, right? And they
Correct.
pick up on that.
Correct. Correct. And actually, I'm just about to start a leadership circle. I call it WOTE, Women on the Edge of Whatever.
Love it.
But using some of Brene Brown's work and Tasha Eurich's work, and both of them have got quizzes. Tasha Eurich is hers is validated in that it gets me to answer some questions, and then I send it to somebody I know who knows me well to validate my answers. Sure, they're kind of pop quizzes, but they can often provide a bit of insight as to how is somebody else's experience of me. So there's lots and lots of help, but none of it means anything unless we get it into our bones. I think what is the Asaro tribe might say, knowledge is just rumor until it lives in the muscle.
Oof, I love that. Yeah, that's true. That's true. So just on that, like, what would you say to someone who's listening, who's perhaps really resonating with your story of the overfunctioning, overworking, driven by this wound of not feeling good enough, who may have the awareness, but yet it hasn't landed in their muscle yet, and they haven't been able to liberate themselves from the shackles? What would you say to like this high powered professional entrepreneur that might be listening right now?
It's a long game, which may put people off, but find somebody who can help. I think our own minds are where the issue's created. So sometimes just help talking to somebody else and getting it out of our head, because the thoughts run around in our head rent free. And Einstein said, you can't solve the problem with the same level of thinking that created it. So sometimes just talking it out, but be very discerning about who that person is. One of the boys is currently seeing a therapist, and I said to them, it's nice to have somebody to talk to, but a lot of therapists will just swill around in the problem with you. Like, you've got to find the right person who's going to, both that you feel comfortable and safe with, but somebody who's going to push you to be better, to be different, to make the changes, who's going to hold you accountable. And there's huge amounts of research that, New Year's resolutions stick when they're done in a group setting. And I think personal development is the same. So, and don't try and change everything at once. What is? It's often like a game of Kaplunk, the plastic tube with all the marbles and the fiddlesticks, and you pull out one and maybe something breaks away, and you pull out another and there might be a few more marbles that fall away. Well, I had lots of places that a lot of marbles fell away, and ayahuasca was a real linchpin for me. And there's a lot of stuff that just dropped off then. So it's a try different things, and understand the difference between quitting because it's hard and quitting and changing course because it's not working. They're different.
For sure. And yeah, I agree with you on the accountability piece. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as a self-made leader. Every leader or anyone who has understood what their purpose is and have deployed themselves in that purpose consistently to lead themselves have done so in partnership or in solidarity or in community with others. And that's really, really powerful, whether it's a trusted friend or a mentor or advisor or whoever it might be. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yep. And I think the last thing that I would say is that the people that trigger us the most, grind our gears and get us going, they are usually the ones that can be the earth angels that teach us. Just very hard when we just want to throat someone or throat punch someone or poke their eyes out or, whatever, because I'm not above it. But they are usually, it's like, what's going on here? What is going on here? And sometimes for me, it's that injustice, because that was another thing that I learned with that psychotherapist for a lot of money, that children that have suffered great injustice seek justice with a capital J. So for me, often it's like, hang on, this isn't fair. This isn't fair. And then I've got to work out, can I live with that unfairness, or can I do something about it? Or do I need to let it go?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. As we bring it in for a landing, Meredith, what does being liberated mean to you?
Liberation for me is a greater sense of self, both to be selfless and selfish and selfing when it's required, and just being so much happier in my own skin, not constantly seeking and striving. There's a sense of, I continue to have a sense of curiosity about the world, but whilst I want to continue to strive, I also have a level of contentment that just was not available to me previously.
Beautiful. Thank you, Meredith. Where can people connect with you? If they have a question or if something stirred in them, if they want to learn more, how can people get to know more about you and connect with you in your work?
Just pop me a LinkedIn with a little note. That's probably the best thing. I'm Meredith Collins. Because I was such an early adopter of social media, I got my own URL. So Meredith Collins, and I hope my profile picture isn't too far from this. It's certainly not a glamour shot. I'm recognisable and Sydney based.
Wonderful. I want to honor you, Meredith. You really expressed parts of yourself that are vulnerable today. And that takes so much courage and so much humility and compassion and love for yourself and devotion to want to serve humanity. And I see that and I respect it. It means the world, and I know it will touch, I'm sure, at least one person's heart. And so, yeah, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing that today.
Thanks, David. Thank you for this important work that you're doing. More people need to get the message.
I appreciate that. And yeah, for you, that's you who is listening right now. If something in this conversation with Meredith helped you or served you or some way or resonated with you, as Meredith said, please continue the conversation and share it with someone who you believe might benefit, because this is important inner work, and I believe it's the most important work that we can do in our lives, not just for ourselves, but everyone around us. So if you've made it this far, thank you so much. I love you so much, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Thank you.